Hello, everybody, and welcome to TJ's Lego Room. And today we're going to be talking about the largest MOC that I have ever made. And not only is it the largest MOC I've ever made, it is also the largest set of instructions I've ever made. It's taken me like 2 months to do this, so I hope you guys appreciate it. The instructions are up on rebrickable.com right now. You're welcome to head over and check that out if you're interested. Or you can go ahead and stick around here, and you're going to learn some things about the ATTC, all right? Now, just to give an idea of how long these instructions took and how outside of the normal amount of time it normally takes, the John Blake Batmobile I released like a couple weeks ago, I spent like 3 days on it, like a couple hours a day, and that was it. Like I got the digital build done. I put the instructions together in PDF form, got them uploaded and everything. 3 days, no problem. This one took me 2 months. Like and those 3 days doing the John Blake Batmobile, I was doing on my laptop while my desktop I was going through and doing the instructions for the ATTC. The instructions are so intense that my brand new computer, was struggling to handle all of the changes and the call outs and all the other things. You'd have to know stud.io to understand what I'm saying. It's a big deal, okay? It's rough. But you're here to see this thing, right? The all-terrain tactical command. And you want to know about some new details that I may not have shared in the last video, which you can find on my channel, or maybe I'll figure out the iCard thing and maybe you can click on it. Maybe. I'm not big at this. I'm not very good at this YouTube thing yet. We'll get there together. Let's talk about why I built the all-terrain tactical command while you hopefully look at a few pictures. Back in 2019, the Facebook group called Lego Star Wars Fan, which is now called Bantha Bricks, fans of Lego Star Wars. And they held a mock contest where the grand prize was a chance to attend a local Lego convention here in Utah called Brick Slopes. It's actually a pretty big convention. It's really sweet. Lego recognizes it as an official of like adult fans of Lego event, which is pretty cool. And for some reason, I got it in my head that I really wanted to win these tickets, and I had lost so many contests before that there was no reason for me to think that I would actually win this contest. But for some reason, this one was going to get my full attention, and by golly, I was going to do my darndest to win those tickets. Surprisingly, it didn't take long for me to decide on what my submission was actually going to be. I had lost many of the early contests to builders who invested way more parts into their build, so I knew it was going to have to be a really big MOC that I built. Coincidentally, I had also been looking into various videos critiquing a lot of vehicle designs in Star Wars, and some of the most detailed breakdowns were about the, of course, beloved AT-AT or AT-AT. And I've heard both pronunciations are correct. I've heard it both ways. I then took it upon myself to fix as many of those problems as I could with my MOC. I called my version of it the All-Terrain Tactical Command Center, as you know. The first and most glaring issue of the AT-AT was pretty easy to diagnose and even easier to fix. The standard walker was unsteady, only having 4 legs, and was easy to trip. So I increased it to the 6 total legs, 4 smaller front and rear legs, and 2 large centered legs. Now, some of you may think that this is inspired by the ATTE, and partially it was, but interestingly enough, when I tried to draw it with 6 identical legs just in my notebooks, it still didn't look good. The larger middle legs just looked aesthetically more pleasing, to me at least. This design not only steadied the ATTC over the original, but it also made it much more difficult to take down by focusing any attacks on the legs. Of course, in universe, the legs would be extremely durable and help to prevent takedowns. But as an added feature, which I unfortunately wasn't able to include in the Lego build, the 2 center legs had giant pylons that could be driven deep into the ground underneath it to help steady the walker even more. And these pylons actually would be in the legs and go down through the feet into the ground. So in theory, the ATTC could stand with all of its occupants safe from harm and without tripping or falling over, with only the 2 center legs remaining. Obviously, it wouldn't be able to move from that point, but it couldn't be taken out that way either. Of course, the 2 center legs would end up having the most armor and be nearly indestructible. I say nearly because, Death Stars exist in this universe. I'm sure a Death Star would be able to destroy just about anything. The second topic that people had issues with was the AT-AT's purpose. And while you may break it down into other things, it really was, why does the AT-AT exist, that caused a lot of these problems. A lot of the critiques pointed out that the design of the vehicle wasn't suited well to its actual role. While intimidation is a major factor, and it did succeed on that part, it also had a specific military role to play, which is actually implied in its name. It's an all-terrain armored transport. Unfortunately, the vehicle seemed to get failing marks in almost every aspect of that name. All-terrain, well, it couldn't be deployed in urban areas due to the size and weight, because it would destroy all the roads and any other obstacles below 7 stories tall. I mean, if you imagine it roaming around, in our world, it'd be knocking down a whole lot of power lines. It'd have a lot of problems. You couldn't just drop it in, even in New York City, and have it walk around. You'd still have issues. So they were also limited in their deployment on unstable or non-solid terrain as well, because of how heavy they were. So places that were heavy in mud or sand or anything else that can't handle the weight of that, it's just not going to be able to move very well, or it'll get stuck or fall over or tip or get off balance in any way, and with its high center of gravity, just topple right over, unfortunately. As far as the armored part, I do have to admit that they were actually pretty fine that way. The all-terrain armored transport, the armored part of it, yeah, they did a pretty good job. I mean, it was impervious to most blasters that we saw in Empire Strikes Back. However, if we looked at Rogue One, we can see that some heavier armament on fighter craft and things like that possibly could be able to take it out if it was able to hit some of its weak points. Now, as far as a transport, while it could handle and could carry quite a few troops and equipment and supplies and speeder bikes and things like that, these things were so slow, it really seems like just about any other form of transportation would be a little bit more effective than the AT-AT. After I evaluated these points for some time, and after taking the suggestion of another YouTube channel called Generation Tech, I decided that the AT-AT shouldn't be a transport at all, but a battlefield headquarters or a command center. This would make the all-terrain aspect a lot less important, since the only movement would be to secure an advanced position as you progress on the battlefield. But it also meant the ATTC could be dropped into a single area for the duration of the campaign if needed, and didn't need to be roaming around a battlefield or an urban area to fulfill its purpose. So if you were able to drop the ATTC in the middle of like Central Park, and it would handle the attack on New York from there without having to walk down the streets or everything, you can actually see how that would be an effective use of this of a walker like that. So also having the command center on top of the tall legs did allow for a better line of sight communication on open battlefields, but also could give a sight advantage if the windows or an observation platform were incorporated into the walker. And of course on mine, you can see I opted for the window look. Of course, many people have said the transparent windows don't make sense in a battle scenario, but in this case they do have massive movable armor plates that are not only borderline ridiculous as far as their thickness, but they have safety measures built in to be able to close with gravity if there is a sudden loss of power, therefore making sure that the windows don't become a vulnerability if the power source was knocked out by an EMP or ion cannons or something like that. As far as the rest of the vehicle, I did keep the heavy armor of the AT-AT, maybe even increasing it just a little, because you know how nervous the brass can get if they aren't protected in every single way, right? As a small extra bonus though, one of the other criticisms of the AT-AT was that generally in combat, armor is best used as a last resort, and that using speed and maneuverability to avoid getting hit in the first place is usually a better tactic. The ATTC does solve this issue because it's a rearward command center for the battle rather than an assault walker. So kind of just the idea of changing its role made it a much better tactical and strategic decision on being so heavy and so heavily armored. The next bit of issues with the AT-AT had to do with the head of the walker. Firstly, the neck was a particularly weird inclusion in the design. While it does make it very intimidating to see it turn slowly and like look directly at you before it blows you up, it did create an obvious weak point that became a natural target, the neck section. If we go even further into the real world, having your pilot and crew exposed in a small jet out on the front of your tank is pretty much just a bad idea in general. But I didn't fix that part because, well, it just wouldn't look like a walker anymore. It looked like a walking box. And come on, I'm trying to fix the problems. I'm not trying to totally make it unrecognizable. With this in mind, the ATTC has a very small neck, but it's basically just a large armored doorway that's only two studs wide. But I know some X-Wing pilots did bullseye womp wraps, and they're no bigger than 2 studs. This makes it close to impossible to try to take it out, though, from that spot, at least as we see it done in some of the movies and films. Also, when it comes to the cockpit, a lot of critics like to point out that having a traditional windscreen or windshield on a futuristic military vehicle doesn't make sense. I did actually agree with that, however. So for the pilots, I did create the horn on the head that made it, that was full of sensors and things like that, as well as kind of a Cylon-looking eye that goes from one side all the way to the other. And they'd both be filled with sensors and cameras that would broadcast the information and send it to a virtual windshield and windscreen with heads-up displays, so the pilots are a lot less exposed. And even if you shot the ATTC directly in the head into the eye, quote-unquote, sections, it's not going to do anything. Your pilots aren't going to be injured. They'll just lose some of their sensor capacity. Now, weapon systems. A word on firepower. The AT-AT has 4 weapon hardpoints. That's it. And they're all on the head. So if you simply attack it from behind to the side, you're pretty much safe from retaliation because the head can't actually turn 180 degrees to even get you from the side. Even though the ATTC is designed to be far away from the front lines of the new Walker, it's anything but defenseless, with no less than 14 weapon hardpoints on the outside of the Walker. On each side of the lower section of the body, 2 heavy repeating multi-directional laser cannons, mounted front and rear, can lock onto and take out any threats on the sides of the Walker. Underneath the Walker, on the chin just under the speeder bay in the back, are 2 quad laser cannons similar to those found on the Millennium Falcon. These are the main anti-ground vehicle weapons, and they do not disappoint. Now, each of these 6 hardpoints that I've talked about so far are basically facing downwards, but obviously a lot of threats come from the air. With the AT-ATs, it was the snow speeders, and in the AT-ACTs from Rogue One, we see U-Wings and X-Wing being a major issue. Now, well, of course, we're going to have 4 quad laser anti-aircraft cannons with auto tracking and optional explosive rounds, like to create that flak look that we all love to see in the in military movies and stuff like that. Try to fly even a little too close and you're going to be totally done. I mean, these things can pretty much cover the Walker from the midsection up and in the air around it from pretty much every direction. So if you try to fly up to this thing, you're going to be having to deal with those cannons for sure. Of course, while most of the weapon systems are primarily defensive, I believed that a rearward command post would still have a way to offer some minimal support to the front lines if needed. And so these massive destruction cannons that you see here take up the entire top floor of the Walker. The behind section, that is the control, also holds some munitions and loading mechanisms and is a pretty cramped quarters for the guys that are working in there. And yes, for those of you who have seen the last video or have seen this thing before, I did not find a way for those troops to go down into the main body yet. But I have been working on a possible total redesign using the same parameters, but maybe tweaking the design a little bit and moving it forward. Let's jump to the very tippy top. This is just a fun arrangement of communication towers that I thought looked good with the Walker. That's pretty much it. A lot of people thought that the large dish was some kind of target tracking dish combined with some point defense laser turret. It is not, because sometimes other people come up with cool things that I didn't think about. So it happens. You know what's really crazy though about this? I haven't even talked about the main command deck or the troop compartment. That's insane, isn't it? I've been going over this for so long, and holy cow, I feel like I'm only barely halfway through, but don't worry, I am more than halfway through. There are actually even a ton of details I haven't even talked about here that I've totally skipped over that are just for the people who buy the instructions, so enjoy that. Alright, so now let's talk about the command deck. So starting at the back, we have a landing pad. This pad was big enough to land everything from Outland TIE fighters to shuttles and even some of the troop transport ships. It was very important to me that there be a way for battle commanders to be able to come and go as needed, since there were no officers' quarters on the walker. I also wanted high-ranking officers to be able to visit the command center for inspections, overseeing the battles, or even just choking out an underling who failed them for the last time. And so a landing platform was always part of my plans. Those who've seen the original video for this ship will already know that the landing platform was actually the first part of the walker that I designed, and from there built out the rest. Access to the command center is through some mechanical sliding doors that open pretty wide, thanks to a mechanism based on the old Separatist shuttle Lego, set number 8036, and that's when you enter the war room, is right through those doors. You'll find a lot of the same features seen on the bridge of the original trilogy Venators and the prequels Venators and the original trilogy Star Destroyers. You'll find a lot of the same features seen on the bridge of those vessels. The officers mainly stick close to the hologram table and maybe around some of the windows, which is their main workstation, while the intelligence technicians and walker operators were kept in a lowered bay, allowing the officers to have an unobstructed view to the outside when the window shields were open. Of course, a complement of stormtroopers was always present on this level, and while the technicians were told they were just there as security for the officers, their primary purpose was to eliminate all lower level workers in case of an invading force taking the walker. Make sure they couldn't be captured. And now the crew quarters of this ultimate walker. The pilots and cockpit gunners, so the two extra gunners that you see in the cockpit there, have a direct walkway to the middle and rear compartments on the lower level, where you see we've got some beds, we've got a small kitchen, some entertainment, and a weapons cache for pretty much every type of situation. At the very back, in a set-aside bay, a couple of speeder bikes were stored to be used for escorts, patrols, or some limited ground defense, anti-infantry type stuff. And that, my friends, is the entire idea behind the All-Terrain Tactical Command Walker. It's a comprehensive redesign of the AT-AT around fixing what many deem to be the biggest issues and problems with the original. Of course, these issues never stop people from picking up the latest of these walkers whenever LEGO decides to release them. And that will absolutely include the $800 UCS version that I've heard rumors about for later this year, possibly. For those of you still curious on how I did in the contest that I entered, I actually did win, and I was able to attend Brixlopes 2019 for free, as well as being given a section of table space to display many of my other MOCs among the crazy other collections on display. Then, surprisingly, I was actually informed that 2 of my MOCs were selected for prizes. One being this monster, of course, that actually won the Best Star Wars Base Award, and my Ahsoka lightsabers, which actually won the Best of Star Wars overall, which, when you think about it, it was actually an extremely high honor for me, because this particular year of Brixlopes was entirely Star Wars themed. In the end, and it actually happened on May the 4th weekend, so 2 years ago this weekend. In the end, my awards consisted of a couple of trophies, as well as some free sets, including the ATM-6 from The Last Jedi, which I had not been able to pick up yet. So in the end, both the ATM-6 that I've got and this ATTC walker will always hold a special place in my heart, and forever stand as a monument to the very first online contest that I ever won. And actually, up to this point, it's the only online contest I've ever won, so yay. I guess there's only one way to win. Now, thank you for sticking with me this far. If you have stuck out to this point, thank you so much. I know this video is extra long and I've rambled on about a whole lot of stuff, but I hope you got some of the enjoyment of some of the idea of the enjoyment that I get from this walker and from this construction. Now, the next couple of weeks, I'm actually going to continue to share some extra videos on the subject. I have a video where I see how many of the ships in my Lego room are able to land. It's actually an old video, so some of my newer ships aren't included on there. But we actually try to see how many of the ships will land on the ATTC, which is actually pretty fun. And I'll guarantee you there's a ship that you don't think will land on there that absolutely fit. You'll be surprised, I'm sure. But we'll have that coming out in the next couple of weeks, as well as a behind the scenes look at how I actually built this walker from start to finish. It's kind of a slideshow, kind of like we're doing here, showing off some of the really cool stuff that we were able to do. But either way, I hope that this was worth your time. I really appreciate it. And again, the whole reason I'm doing this is because I enjoy this, and I hope some of you enjoy it as well. And until we meet again in another set of instructions or on my YouTube channel in the next video, play well. Bye. Oh yeah, and there is a Toblerone in here. So, you're welcome.